The real story behind California's Trump slump. Despite Governor Gavin Newsom and the California Legislature declaring during this year's May revision budget discussions that the state was suffering from a Trump slump, supposedly causing a significant revenue loss, President Donald Trump had really nothing to do with what state officials themselves have described as a structural budget deficit, meaning that current law spending exceeds current law revenues. The real problem here in California stems from a $165 billion error in revenue projections that were made by the state budget writers in 2022. That mistake fueled Governor Newsom's boast of a $97 billion budget surplus, which in turn drove unsustainable budget growth and ballooning general fund expenditures. The Democratic governor and legislature simply could not stop themselves from significantly overspending once they thought they had a gigantic surplus. However, once the phantom surplus was exposed, the state was left with a long-term spending obligation that was badly out of alignment with its actual revenues. The fish mouth, in other words, the difference between expenditures and revenues on a trend line, the fish mouth is wide open. And Governor Newsom will likely finish his second term having spent a full 4 years trying and failing to bring the state's budget back into balance. Not exactly a great place to end up for someone who bragged about his fiscal management skills. This week, the Legislative Analyst's Office announced that the long-term budget deficit for the state next year will be at least $21 billion. No amount of fund shifts, accounting changes, or budget gimmicks can paper over a shortfall of that size. And this just 4 months after the last, quote, balanced budget was passed by the California Legislature and signed into law by Governor Newsom. Some elected officials and Capitol staff are pinning their hopes on a miraculous rebound in revenues. But even if that rebound occurs, would it really vindicate the so-called Trump slump? Personal and corporate income tax payments to California's Treasury in September 2025 surpassed budget estimates by $2.3 billion. And general fund income tax collections are now $3.5 billion above year-to-date projections. That may sound impressive at first glance. However, the higher revenue collections were entirely predictable. Why? The California Department of Finance had lowballed its May revision revenue forecast by basing its capital gains estimates on the lowest point of the S&P 500 index in 2025. There was considerable room for growth in those numbers. And I mean, there was a lot of room for growth in those numbers. So it's no surprise that we're seeing year-to-date revenues higher than what was predicted. Unfortunately for Governor Newsom, when he leaves office next year, he's likely to leave his successor with a double-digit billion-dollar structural budget deficit. The only way to avoid that fate would be to convince a legislature dominated by progressive Democrats to enact major reductions in state spending, both now and in the future. That seems highly unlikely. Newsom is on track to go down as yet another California governor who failed to manage the state's finances without running massive budget deficits and increasing borrowing just to balance the books. Where the heck is Governor Jerry Brown when you really need him? For the She/He Strategy Group in Sacramento, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.